monsters and ghosts to otherworldly beings. Join the Explorers as they venture into the darkest realms, seeking the truth to what goes bump in the night.
Good evening and welcome to Explorers, Seekers of the Truth. Tonight is episode 15, I believe, Les?
15.
Yes, as always, I am joined by my co-host and best friend, Les Sienkiewicz. So how are you doing tonight, buddy?
Fantastic. I got to tell you, I'm very excited for tonight's show, not just because I think the topic is really cool, and we'll get into that. I'm very excited to use my brand new microphone. I've been wanting this thing for a long time. I finally got it today. It's the Shure SM7B. So thanks to my in-laws for the Christmas gift card to Guitar Center, and my buddy Matt Northey for driving me up there and picking up the microphone. And thanks to the kid, and I feel so bad because I don't know his name. This kid that works up there, I've been talking to him. He knows about the show. He watches the show, and I've been talking to him about this microphone. He's helped me out really well throughout the last few months to help me get it and whatnot, or walk me through some of the stuff with it. But anyways, got the new mic, so I hope it sounds good. I'm really excited to have it. So anyways, other than that, I'm really good. I'm looking forward to the show tonight. So I'm going to let you take over. Oh, wait, let me go through my normal spiel.
Yeah, you got to do
our shtick. Let me bring up the agenda here. So, as always, there are several ways for everybody to get in touch with us. You could reach us at our website on the Contact Us page at www.explorersgroup.com. You can find us on Twitter at Explorers Group is our handle. And obviously on Facebook, facebook.com/Explorers. So now with that out of the way, I guess we could, get on with the show. So I'm going to let you take it over there, bud. Huh.
You could not just say backsplash and let me have one thing today.
I'm trying. Oh yeah, I'm trying to watch myself on trying not to sound too much like an idiot. But one other thing, as we always say to you guys, Be Live has an awesome feature where we can interact with you guys live during the show. So when you comment under the show broadcast on Facebook, we'll see it on the Be Live interface, and we could chit chat back and forth. So feel free to comment and ask us any questions, bring up any questions you have regarding the show and whatnot. So without further ado, here is Chad Charlesworth.
Yeah, so tonight we're going to be covering one of our listeners actually suggested this. One of the things we've been asking for is some ideas on show topics and some guests and stuff like that you guys want to hear about. Mm-hmm. And this was actually one that up until until Charlie brought it up, I don't think I had ever heard of this, building and events that surround it. Mm-hmm. So tonight we are going to be talking about the Nameless thing of Berkeley Square. Mm-hmm. Basically, Berkeley Square was designed in 1740, and the earliest ghost sightings, come in and around about 1789, and they are the sightings of a young woman who seems to be hanging from the windowsills of the uppermost floor. She can be seen screaming. And basically what people are seeing is her there holding on, and then she lets go and starts to fall to her death and disappears on the way down.
That's a happy thought.
I'm sorry, what was that?
I said that's a happy thought, a happy picture.
Yeah, and the thing is, she isn't, like, reputable people have seen this, police officers and other people, throughout, and this isn't the area of Berkeley Square is to kind of give people an idea. It's not far from Buckingham Palace. It is right down the street from the U.S. Embassy in London, and right up the street, in fact, from the Hard Rock Cafe in London. So it's a very, affluent area of London. It's very sought after real estate. And, for people to be seeing this, it's, kind of lends credibility to some of the sightings here. And the thing of it is her sightings don't just have to do with her playing out the final moments of her life. She's also been known to move furniture, make knocking and rapping in the attic. This, knocking and rapping sounds up in the attic.
Mm-hmm. Now, just so our listeners are clear, this spirit. Now that I believe you're talking about the building at 50 Berkeley Square, correct? It was the 4-story brick townhouse that was constructed in. If you don't mind me going ahead taking this part.
Yeah.
In the late 18th and early 19th centuries until 1827, it was the home of the British Prime Minister George Canning, who is commemorated by a plaque in the front of the house. And I have a picture that I'll share with you all.
If you could pull up that photo that you have of it.
Yeah, this is it here, as you can see. This is what it looks like now.
It's actually basically considered the most unaltered building in London. Mm-hmm. So the front of it, as you see it now, is pretty much how it would have looked when it was designed. Mm-hmm. And you can see up there, the upper windows is where they claim to have seen this woman hanging on for her life and dropping from. Now, you notice there is a iron rail spiked fence out in front of there. Mm. So, yes, it was the home of Prime Minister George Canning. And he lived there until about 1827. Mm-hmm. And he actually reported hearing strange noises coming from the uppermost floors, the attic. He never reported running into anything or actually seeing anything. His reports more had to do with him hearing and, kind of having those type experiences with the banging around, maybe some furniture being moved, mm-hmm. and all that. Now, basically, the next resident of the property, it was leased by an old woman who passed away within the walls at about the age 90. Mm-hmm. Her name was Elizabeth Curzon, and she basically lived there from 1828 to 1859.
Okay. Now, not to interrupt, but I like to do that. Back to the original story you were talking about. Now, mm-hmm. that the woman's name was Adeline, right? Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay.
Or that's the name attributed to her.
Okay. And she lived in that building?
If I'm not confusing my stories, I believe she was the maid. Okay. That's why she is seen on the 4th floor in the basically what would have been servants' quarters area, hanging out one of those windows. And there's a story that goes along with that she may have been being attacked by the master of the house at the time,
who I think was an abusive uncle.
Could be. See, this is one of the things, and we'll see, you folks will see as we go through this episode. There's a lot of these stories don't quite line up, or that they line up in several different time frames.
Yeah, there's a lot of activity, as Chad said, in this house. And the cool part about this location is it's not just paranormal. There's a little bit of everything. There's ghost stories. There's a little bit of cryptozoology, which we'll get into a little bit later. And there's just it's just a culmination of a lot of turmoil and just crazy stuff that had happened throughout centuries, I guess. And like Chad said, there's a lot of overlap, and a lot of the stories, in a way, don't make sense. A lot of the stories kind of backdate the other. It's very like. Now, he did most of the research. I'm an honest guy. I'll admit it. he did all the research. But what we talked about when we were reviewing a lot of this stuff is it seems like a lot of these stories just they're very strange. So we'll get into them. But like I said, we wanted to kind of backdate that Adeline story, and it looks like her story was a lot of abuse. So I would imagine that I guess she just was at the end of her rope and decided to leap, as the story goes, and take her life due to unhappy circumstances.
Yeah, I mean, that's one of those things where back then you wouldn't have had many options. It's not like you could quit a job, especially in a
Right.
servant's position. If you quit a job like that, you would be blackballed. You would, pretty much never work in London society again, which was probably the better paying positions for somebody of that education and background.
You were more or less born into what you were going to be for the rest of your life. It's not like the rags to riches story, like, I guess, for lack of better terms, the American dream or whatever. Like, obviously it's not America, it's England, but
Yeah.
it's not a rags to riches story. Like, when you were born poor, you don't have the opportunity to better yourself and grow into something better. You're born poor and you die poor because you were meant to stay that way. So she probably was extremely miserable with the life that she had. And so what you were saying before, all these noises and things moving, knocking, rapping, and all that stuff, they're attributing to be this Adeline's ghost.
Yes. Yeah.
And that's particularly in the 4th floor.
Yeah, there's 2 floors in this house that basically a lot of the activity focuses around.
Mm-hmm.
The 2nd floor and the 4th floor.
Okay.
Now,
is there any, not to interrupt again, but what the hell? Is there any significance to that? And like, as to why it's just those 2 floors when it's really, there's the basement, 1st floor, 2nd, 3rd, and 4th?
Yeah, not that there's necessarily a good correlation to why, except for a lot of the stories and the legend of the Nameless thing of Berkeley Square basically focus on those 2 areas of the home.
Okay.
And it's not saying that things have not happened on other floors and in other parts of the home. It's just a lot of the major stories that we're going to go over tonight kind of focus on those 2 floors of the home.
Mm-hmm.
So
it just kind of adds to the mystique of the building as well. Why, you know what I mean? It's just, why only those? See, and that's what I was saying before, is there's a lot, and you brought it up. Things just don't make sense. Like they just, there's a lot of open-ended questions, I guess, if you will, with this location. So, but anyways, go ahead, keep going. We were talking about the Prime Minister before I backtracked.
Oh, yeah.
We're getting into the old lady's ghost, Miss Elizabeth.
Yeah, I started to talk about when I did this research, I wanted to build out a timeline because a lot of the research material and stuff like that kind of jumps you around so much that you start to lose track of the time frame of things going on, and the history of the home itself becomes very distorted. So what I did was I kind of sat down and I actually drew out a timeline. So we would have an accurate or as close to accurate history on this case as we possibly could. Mm-hmm. So from 1828 to 1859, that's when Elizabeth Curzon lived there. And she had died at 90 years old. Most likely died of natural...
Yeah, at that point, yeah, natural causes. That's a nice long life.
Yeah, especially for the 1850s. I mean, that's
what I was going to say. Yeah,
that's well impressive. Above expectancy.
Uh-huh.
Now, here is where we start to the timeline starts getting kind of distorted. Okay? So we're going to talk about the 1840s death of Sir Robert Warboys. Mm-hmm. Okay, basically the story, I'm going to kind of paraphrase the story. I have it up in front of me here. It was alleged after a nobleman spent the night in the attic and he was left paralyzed with fear and could not speak, that this young Sir Robert Warboys took basically a dare to spend the night in the 50 Berkeley Square.
Mm-hmm.
And, he was basically in a bar in a tavern in London, the Holborn district, one evening. And he was a person not prone to superstition. In fact, he is quoted as saying, "This is unadulterated poppycock."
Whew. Dang, that's some foul language. Hi, Cleo.
Yes. And that actually brought me to Poppycock Babble, which was a band we went to see when we were after college.
Back in the day, baby. I love them.
Yeah, the Stick song.
Mm-hmm. For anybody in the Lehigh Valley area of Pennsylvania about 15 years ago would know what we're talking about.
Yeah. But that I had to use the unadulterated poppycock statement. I wanted to make sure I got it in the show this evening.
Mm-hmm.
So basically, he got drunk and, got a little, alcohol fueled beer muscles. Mm-hmm. And, basically the story says he raised his pitcher of ale skyward and announced to his cohorts, "I wholeheartedly accept your preposterous harebrained challenge."
Ooh, dang, those are fighting words.
That's some pretty famous last words there, I guess.
Yeah, right.
As you folks will see, Sir Robert Warboys doesn't make it much further in this story. So basically, he went to the house, spoke with the landlord, and the landlord basically made a deal with him. You can spend the evening in the area you requested, but at the first sign of danger, you must ring the bell. Anything out of the ordinary. You also must be armed with a pistol.
Oh my God. So the bell, I would assume, would be like a waiter's bell or some way to alert, like the staff back in the day. I guess the masters of the house would have bells that they could alert down in the lower levels.
Yeah, basically, you would have in like certain areas of the home, you'd have a section of the wall that would have different bells, and they would be labeled to where the bells corresponded to. Mm-hmm. Excuse me. So basically, in the Addams Family, when they'd pull the big line and you hear the dong, and Lurch would come in and go, "You rang." That's how Lurch always knew where to go.
Oh, nice. Nice. So you're saying the caveat of him staying there is he had to ring the bell, the designated bell, yes, and he had to have a pistol with him at all times.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yes. So, as basically the homeowner or landlord, as they say in this point, and you got to realize this is England, so homeowner, landlord,
flat lord, flat owner,
basically figured that, this bell will be ringing relatively soon, and I'll see this boy again in a couple of minutes. Mm-hmm. So the clock chimed midnight, and Warboy settled down at a table to await the thing's arrival.
Can before you go on again, I'm going to interrupt. Can you elaborate on the thing, or am I jumping too far ahead?
Let's hold off on the thing for a couple of minutes. Okay. I'll get back.
Okay.
Right. And basically, the landlord departs, at about midnight, and precisely 45 minutes past the hour, so 12:45 that evening, mm-hmm, he is startled awake by the violent clanging of the bell adjacent to his bed. And before he has time to clear his thoughts and react, there's a single gunshot that echoes out through the night. So he runs in, finds the room pretty much as he left it, except for two things. Sir Robert Warboys is no longer at the table. He finds him in a corner of the room, clutching the pistol that is still smoking at this point in his white-knuckled grip of fear. The thing that makes this very interesting is the description of Warboys' body.
Okay.
When they find him, his lips are peeled back and his eyes are bulging out of his head. And basically it's explained as, death due to intense fear.
Mm-hmm.
And the landlord finds where the bullet hole is, and it's basically across the room from where he finds Warboys' body. And there's no body, though, that is, left from the bullet. There's no thing, there's no dead creature, there's no human.
So he shot at something, but whatever the something wasn't a physical something, or he just missed entirely.
Yeah. I mean,
or if it is, go ahead.
If you're that frightened and you're shooting, a single candlelight in a room, a decent sized room, wouldn't really cast a lot of light across the room.
Right. You're going to have a lot of heavy shadow. Yeah.
So, I mean, shooting across the room at like that, you would think if there was something physical there, you'd still be able to generally hit it.
Mm-hmm.
Low light shooting and stuff like that. But again, we are talking about something that is, borderline paranormal, demonic, poltergeist, cryptid. So really not, hammering down on if something is really there to shoot. Again, too, you're in a room, you've already heard all the scary stories, and you're now panicked because it's getting later and you're hearing things and stuff like that.
Right. Your subconscious is going to get the best of you. And like the landlord had said, his lips were peeled back with his teeth clenched in a grimace of horror, and eyes seemed to be literally bulging from his skull. So that had to be something extremely horrifying, to have somebody's face basically frozen with fear. Like their death mask, if you will, would be pretty frightening.
Yeah, I mean, that would be... See you later, Charlie.
Hey, Charlie.
That would be something, you think of all the situations in life, near car, when you're in the car and you almost have a car accident.
Right.
When you slip and fall and stuff like that. To actually die from fear, to be that afraid that you actually die from it.
And your muscles just basically freeze in fear.
Yeah. So that's something that definitely kind of interests me, and it's very odd. Because as we're going to see, a lot of the stories kind of follow this line of fear and paralysis and, loss of life that can only be attributed to extreme fear. So now that, like I said, is the 1840s. Now, if you remember back to me saying about Miss Curazon, she was living there from 1828 to 1859. So that already puts a tick on this story to me.
Right. So then she would have been there, or it would have been occupied.
Yeah.
Unless was she a servant, just like a quarter maid or something, where she would just be there to do what she needed to do while the place was vacant?
No, the street that basically runs below Berkeley Square is Corazon Street. The street's named after her.
Okay.
Yeah.
Go on.
So that's my first thing on this is I'm only basically 100 years into this building's existence,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm already on my first story that doesn't quite match up.
Add up. Yeah. Yeah.
Now, possibilities being, Miss Corazon could have been, basically she would have been somebody of a well-to-do nature.
Mm-hmm.
So she could have been out of the area, summering or wintering, something like that, maybe on vacation, basically. Her servants acting as the, servants of the house basically figure, oh, let's let this guy in here. Maybe they felt bad for him.
Mm-hmm.
He might have been, the story does have him being drunk and drinking.
Right, right.
So they could have looked at it like, oh, let's let this poor man, because of him also being somebody of stature in the community,
right.
they may have allowed him to try to sleep it off.
Mm-hmm.
The whole gunshot, ring the bell type stuff, you must be armed with a pistol and all that may have been added to the story to kind of build up the supernatural nature of the story.
Yeah.
So now we're getting into the history of the house kind of doesn't have a lot going on. And all of a sudden, around 1859, there's a new resident of the home.
So that would be at the end of that Elizabeth Cochrane or whatever her name was, the old lady. She died in 1859. Corazon,
Yeah.
Whatever. Cochrane, you know what I mean, whatever. So she died in 1859. So now it's going to exchange hands to what, the third resident now?
Yes.
Okay.
And this man, he was an eccentric, and he was only known as Mr. Myers.
Mm-hmm.
Had acquired the house in 1859, and he was a recluse who never went outside, answered the door only to receive food from his servants.
Mm-hmm.
Now, one of the possible identities of this Mr. Myers was that of Thomas Myers, who was the son of a member of the Parliament.
Mm-hmm.
So, and he has a story which I'm actually going to kind of get into here and kind of give you a historical reference point to a fictional character that basically has a lot of similarities to Mr. Myers.
Okay.
He basically purchased the home and was setting it up for him and his soon-to-be wife to live in.
Okay.
But right before the wedding, his wife runs off. So after the breakup, he sinks into a deep depression and basically would spend his days locked in the attic and places like that inside the house where he wouldn't speak, he wouldn't deal with anybody. And they basically say he slowly lost his mind.
Mm-hmm.
Just basically due to the depression and the shutting off human communication.
Right.
If anybody knows anything about Charles Dickens,
mm-hmm.
the book Great Expectations,
okay,
the character of Mrs. Haversham,
yeah,
basically Mrs. Haversham is a female who is to get married.
mm-hmm.
The jilted lover runs off, and she basically lives in a house, a mansion that's basically becomes in ruins over the years, and she's won't speak, she doesn't deal with people and stuff like that, and basically everywhere she is seen, she's seen in her wedding dress.
Oh, okay, that's creepy.
Yeah. So there is some similarities to that character in this Myers that shows up in here.
just reversed as a guy.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Now, Charles Dickens was a member of the Ghost Club, which was one of the first paranormal investigation groups in the world. Started prior to the American Civil War. So it's quite odd that he writes a character that shares a lot of similarities with one of the most famous haunted houses already at the time in London.
Right, yeah.
So I just wanted to throw that in there. It just seems quite interesting that there's a strong resemblance between the two.
No. That's good. That's which one is the real one? You know what I mean? Was this kind of a rip off of Dickens, or was Dickens ripping this off?
I would actually have to look up when Dickens wrote that book. I'm not 100% sure.
But the correlation is is funny.
Yeah.
So subjective to say the least.
Now here's one of the things. By the point of Myers' death, the building, its condition had started to deteriorate. So some of the like ghost stories kind of become enhanced by the condition of the building at that point.
Right.
So, you figure if he was a recluse and stuff like that, probably wasn't keeping normal hours.
Right.
He could be up at 3 o'clock in the morning, have every light on in the house.
Yeah.
So that would definitely add to some of the spookiness of the home and stuff like that.
Well, yeah, and like you said, the outside's probably kind of falling apart. The servants probably aren't doing much because they're not ordered to, so they're just doing what they need to do just to, get by. So the place probably looks creepy. The dude's probably up in all hours of the night, and yeah. So then stories start to evolve, or new stories are created. So that's a good point.
Yeah. Now this brings us to around 1872. Okay, now you got to figure that would still be while Mr. Myers was living in the home. But again, story is a little subjective.
Okay.
At this point, Lord Littleton, which basically to us means absolutely nothing here in America. He was a relatively well-to-do British gentleman, military career and stuff like that. Another one of these stories that involves a bet about him, spending the night in the attic.
Okay.
So his story is basically that some point during the night, he sees an apparition form, a brown, misty mass appears in the room across from him. Now, he is armed with a rifle. So basically, he takes up his rifle, fires it, thinks he hears it hit the floor, and basically, being a career military man and stuff like that, just basically goes back to bed.
Now, you say here's it hit the floor, and you're not talking about the bullet, you're talking about whatever he was shooting at.
Whatever he was shooting at, yes.
Okay.
Basically, anybody that hunts, you don't shoot an animal and then run up to it. You let it bleed out and stuff like that, and you let it kind of go through its death process.
Right.
So basically, he shoots it, is like, here's the thud on the floor, kind of rolls over and is like, I'm going to check that in the morning.
Jesus. Which is kind of odd if you think about it, because I mean, I understand if you're hunting, you're outdoors, you're after game, you hit your quarry, that makes sense. But you're in a house, in a dark room, you see something in the corner, you shoot at it, you're thumping, screw it, I'll check it in the morning. Like, that just seems awfully bizarre. But I mean, okay, I get it. So you go on.
Well, I think because of being somebody of reputation at that point, or what they would consider somebody of reputation. For him and stuff like that, the belief was that it wasn't something that it was something physical. That you shoot it, it's going to die. Right. Not that it was something supernatural. I think his whole point was to prove that it was not supernatural. Mm-hmm. And for him to shoot it and just kind of roll over and be like, I'm going to check that in the morning, kind of adds to that mystique of, oh, that's Lord Littleton who slayed the nameless thing of Berkeley Square. Mm-hmm. And commanded the British military.
Let me ask you this. In 1872, so the nameless thing was already a known thing. Well, I guess if you go back to Warboy's story, he was there to disprove it or to find it or something, or to prove that he's not afraid of it.
Well,
how long was this? I was going to say, what was the earliest recollection or sighting of this beast?
The earliest ghost story in that residence goes back to 1789.
Okay. So do you know? Because again, like looking up information on this, I was trying to search for like the origin or the beginning of the nameless thing. What is there any? I couldn't find any starting date of the thing. Not the ghost, but the creature.
Well, I think that would probably be about 1840 would be the thing really becoming the focus of the paranormal activity there, or cryptozoology activity there.
Yeah.
So I would say probably in that 1840-ish era is when this kind of the thing takes over, and it's not just a ghost story anymore.
Okay, but there's no like concrete date that it's just the stories start around that time.
Yeah, and then that's the thing. Like, as I've been going through this, like I said, I had to create a timeline because
to make sense of it all.
Yeah, because the way it jumps around, and then there's overlapping stories that fall in time frames, like we already saw. Miss Curzan would have been living in the house at the point of the Warboys story.
Yeah.
So, this story falls during the possibility of Thomas Myers being there. With Lord Littleton, I really think that was kind of if I show excitement, to get back to what I was talking about, if I show excitement about shooting this thing and running over there and making a commotion, it takes away from my my mystique, my manliness, and how people will view me in this society. This is still very much a society of impressions. You're not dealing with, it wouldn't be acceptable in society, as somebody who's a military man and, a hunter and stuff like that, to make a fuss over doing this at that time. So,
and plus too, back then the idea of a man was much different than the idea of a man now. You know what I mean? You couldn't be afraid. You shouldn't be afraid. You show no fear. You know what I mean? Like,
well, yeah, especially in British culture, you're not supposed to have emotions. You're not supposed to, or you're not supposed to have emotions in public or in a way that would cause a scene, or the fact that it would discredit your family's name and your position in society.
Right.
So basically, Lord Littleton wakes up the next morning, goes over across the room, and looks for his prey that he had, thought he had killed in the night. And he finds nothing but a bullet hole. Now, one of the things I would love for somebody that has access to this building to do is go look for these bullet holes.
Right. See if they are there.
Yeah, that would give a lot of credibility to a few of these stories.
Mm-hmm.
Now, also think about it this way, and this is kind of off the given idea of this. But if Lord Littleton accidentally shot a servant,
it's going to be covered up.
Yeah.
Right.
Also, if he shot a servant and it wasn't going to be covered up, or it was going to be covered up, he wouldn't stress over the fact. He would roll over and go to sleep and wake up in the morning and be like, oh, that's right, I killed my manservant Charlie.
Yeah.
We'll have to replace him. Somebody, find me the new one.
So what was the conclusion of that? What was his final thought, if you will?
He basically felt a supernatural presence and experience. He basically, he thought there was something to it.
Mm-hmm.
Also this goes back though too, if you think about it, with the prestige of somebody of his level. If he shot something and missed, it couldn't possibly be that he missed. It would have to be that it was supernatural.
Right. Yeah, because he was quoted saying that the upper rooms were supernaturally fatal to body and mind. So
yeah,
it wasn't really it was supernatural. It was a ghost. It could because he wouldn't, like you said, he wouldn't miss his target. So.
Yes. So it definitely, it kind of gives, I could see you see those Thug Life video things where the sunglasses and the joint roll into the frame. I can see Lord Littleton having one of those moments. Okay.
Yeah. Right.
So, yeah, I mean,
what's kind of funny too, though, is some of the stories, you have people breaking into the house or spending a night when the majority of the place is vacant, and they die, and they're taken over by fear. They're left horrifically disfigured and in a final state of terror. But yet there's still people that are able to live there. There's still servants that are able to work there that aren't experiencing anything. I just find that a little weird. I mean, you know what I mean? Like, to have such a series of stories and occurrences that some people are able to deal with it or live with it or not experience it, but other people have died from them and have been attacked from them and shot at, whatever it is. And you know what I mean? Isn't it just weird how some people could get through it and others can't?
Well, I think if there is any truth to any of this story and to the legends and stuff like that, I mean, I'm not just saying to this, particular, building and events, but if you think about so far the stories that I've covered that involve a death or anything like that, the girl throwing herself from the window, that's a suicide.
Right.
Okay. So that necessarily doesn't have a lot to do with a creature or a paranormal entity causing these issues. Now,
like Warboy.
What's that?
I said, but take Warboy, for example.
But he willingly goes there to challenge it.
Okay. All right. Fair enough.
Willingly goes into a situation to challenge the unknown. Now, again, I'm not saying there's any truth to any of this, or
right.
You know what I mean? I don't have a dog in this, or a dog in this fight, or whatever the American lexicon for that is. So he willingly goes there to challenge it. He ends up dying in a manner related to extreme fear.
Right.
Now, but that gives us, though, too, with the Lord Littleton story, he also goes to challenge it.
Okay. All right.
But
and again, both of them have weapons.
Yes. So both of them willingly go there with a weapon to protect themselves against whatever this is.
Which kind of segues into one of our next topics or stories, that an attack was done. But now we're moving from when did Littleton's story happen? That was 1872. So
yes,
a few years later, in 1879, the place is then again reoccupied by a new family. So Littleton, if I'm looking at the timeline correctly, Myers was there while Littleton was there.
Yes.
Okay. So Myers was 1885. Was bought, or is that right? Myers was in 1880. No, now this says 1859, but in 1885, the property was bought by the Viscount Beardstead, who rented out the house to a man known simply as Mr. Myers. So was it 1859 or 1885?
This is where the story jumps around, and it doesn't quite always make sense on the timeline.
Right. Which is why I'm trying to kind of make sense of this. So, okay. So let's say 1859. Myers is there, or it's rented to. It's rented, yeah, to 1874.
Yes.
So then, in 1879, a new family had moved into the house, and one of the daughters was due to have her fiance visit, right?
Yes.
And the maid was sent upstairs to set up the attic again, one of the two haunted rooms, as a guest room for the fiance. Because back in those days, until you were married, you didn't stay in the same room as your, significant other or soon to be. So soon she was heard screaming, and when the family ran up to see the commotion, they found her on the floor, backed into the corner, again, kind of like Warboy was found in the corner, with, dead from fear, repeating over and over again, "Don't let it touch me. Let it touch me." Right? So was it a ghost, like an apparition, or was it the thing? All right, which we'll get into later. So, but again, it says again she died the following day in an asylum. So I mean, you could pretty much contribute her death to the apparition, thing, ghost, whatever you want to call it, right?
Yeah.
But she wasn't armed, so I'm trying to build this pattern. You know what I mean? Of it seems to be going after people that challenge, that are more threatening, that have weapons, but yet this was just a little old maid, or a maid. I don't want to say little old maid, but this was just a maid who had gone up to set a room and was then approached and, I don't know, attacked or what, but harassed by this spectral being or unknown thing.
Yeah.
So go ahead.
The fact that she basically is quoted, at some point as saying, "Don't let it touch me."
Yeah. Makes me think that it's not human.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like if it were a distinguishable, unless it was like a shadow person where you can't really make out features or whatever. If it were your run-of-the-mill apparition, you would most likely be able to identify at least a gender.
Yeah, and to say it, and the fact that "don't let it touch me."
Yeah. It makes you think it was coming towards her or trying to grab her or something.
Well, that makes me almost think of the original story in the attic where the girl had thrown herself through the window to escape the abuse.
Mm-hmm.
Like, it's very similar. It's a person of lower, quality, a servant, basically.
Right.
Uh, if the original servant maybe was being sexually molested or taken advantage of by her master, master in the sense of master of the house, not as in slave master.
Right.
So could it have been something trying to molest her at that point?
Well, there are many stories of people that are assaulted that way by paranormal beings, and there's also different kinds of demons like incubus and succubus that are specifically known for their sexual attacks or their sexual connections, you know what I mean? So maybe the initial girl was maybe she was actually attacked by an abusive head of the house, or the one story said about it was an uncle or something.
Yeah.
And maybe it's the spirit or the energy, the negative energy of the uncle. Yeah, you're right, Cleo. Incubus and succubus. Maybe it was the negative energy of the uncle that was just kind of reliving or reenacting the barbaric things that he did to the original girl, Adeline, and maybe that's what this maid was experiencing, and it was more or less just a presence. You know what I mean? Not necessarily an apparition, just some kind of thing.
Yeah.
Yeah,
and that was actually covered in the basically the area that Berkeley Square is in is considered Mayfair.
Mm-hmm.
It's basically famous for the Werewolves of London song. He's been heard lately over in Mayfair.
Yep.
Warren's Yvonne, if anybody is following with that.
Well, it's a very weird area. So, I mean, why not? Why not have songs written about it?
So, I mean, that was covered in a publication of the time. So now I want to jump into, I am going to give you two versions of the same story.
Okay.
One of the two, I am going to then provide you with a lot of information about. Okay.
Okey-dokey.
So I'm going to jump in history to the reported incident in 1943.
Okay. Now, do you want to talk about the kind of the remainder part of that servant story with the nobleman? No, you don't want to go into that?
No, because that kind of again, it kind of repeats a story that is, if you think about it, like Lord Littleton and stuff like that, kind of, it just basically is another time that's listed for that kind of, that story, and for an earlier story, it kind of just muddies the water a little bit more on that subject there.
Okay. All right. So jump forward again to,
yes.
You said what, 1943?
1943. There's basically two sailors from the Portsmouth area. It's a Robert Martin and an Edward Blunden.
Mm-hmm.
And they are reported to be from the HMS Penelope.
Okay.
Which is harbored at this time in London, according to this story, or around that area.
Okay.
So basically, having squandered their lodging funds, from an evening of drinking and revelry, they noticed that 50 Berkeley Square is pretty much abandoned at this point. Okay. So they break in through a basement window, and they find the basement in the lower level of the house to be very damp, and the basement, in fact, is rat infested. Les, can you pop up the picture of the sewer for me?
You better believe it.
Okay. So,
There it
folks, this is basically the sewer system that runs under 50 Berkeley Square and through that area of town. As you notice, there are 3 people in that photo. One guy is standing completely upright in one of the tunnels to the left as you look at it. Another gentleman is working in the closer part of this photo with a pickaxe or something like that. As you can see, that is a rather large space.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and that runs under and through the basement of the home.
And to note, on the right side, there's the 2 tunnels leading in, and that is all running water, probably a foot to 2 feet deep.
Yes.
And it's basically an underground river through those trenches. Through those
Yes.
sewers.
So basically finding the basement damp and rat infested, not very surprising when the sewer runs directly through the basement.
Right.
So they basically, the way the story goes, they make their way upstairs and to the second floor.
Mm-hmm.
Now,
before you go on, just so the house was left vacant by 1887. The place was empty. So from 1887 to the 1940s, it was unoccupied. So I would imagine the state of the house was really bad by the time those guys got in there.
Okay, don't jump so far ahead.
Okay, all right, sorry.
Okay, just bear with me here because I'm
gonna let you go.
Yeah, I have a point here.
Okay.
So they moved up to the upper floor, to the second floor of the home, and Blunden is reported to have been possibly the more sober of the two and expressed anxiety about being in the house.
Mm-hmm.
That he felt a presence and the fear, was building inside him. So his shipmate, who had his rifle with him, props open the window to let a breeze in, figuring some fresh air, help calm his friend down, kind of clear his head a little bit. And they basically build a fire and, find some broken furniture and some rotting floorboards, and they create a fire in the fireplace.
Mm-hmm.
Then sometime after midnight, Blunden awoke to see the door open and heard it creaking as it was opening. And you could see a little silverish grayish creature creeping across the floor towards them. Now, of course, he was too terrified to move, but somehow manages to wake up Martin. The 2 men sit there as they heard the strange, moist scraping sound slowly approach them. Moist scraping sound.
Mm-hmm.
That's a very confusing description. Moist and scraping.
Yeah.
So suddenly the terrified men leap to their feet, faced with this creature's, hideous monstrosity. They basically describe it as undulating towards them. It comes up between them, and it basically, Blunden reaches for the rifle, and as he reaches for the rifle, still wedged in the window frame, the creature suddenly lunges forward, wrapping itself around the young sailor's throat. Now, of course, his friend, the great friend that he is, seizes the opportunity, realizes the door is open, takes off running. Mm-hmm. Runs out of the house, finds a patrolling police officer, grabs him, gets him to come with him. The police officer's looking at it like, oh, great. Another drunk sailor in town causing problems. Mm-hmm. But he goes with the guy. And when they go back, they can't find Blunden on the second floor. Mm-hmm. They run up the stairs. Blunden's not in the room. But the rifle is. The rifle is still in the room. Again, another weapon
Right.
in this
Right.
story. And they find some kind of, moist trail leading to the basement.
Mm-hmm.
And they get down the stairs in the cellar, and they find his dismembered corpse. It was a mangled heap. And, again, the basic story of the eyes bulging from the head, and, mouth, his lips peeled back, and, basically an expression of, just terrified, fear. Now, of course, this story has, like I said, there's two versions of this story, but there's also a couple of versions of this version of the story.
Okay.
One of the variations, the most notable part of this story that varies, is when the description of the thing is given. It goes from this small, pale, grayish creature that's undulating and is making a moist scraping sound as it approaches,
Mm-hmm.
to being a shadowy, man-like figure with a disformed face. And the hands being a misty brown, having a misty brown quality to them.
Yeah, yeah.
So that is one of the first, that's the most notable thing when the story changes.
Okay, but that one they're describing something humanoid.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Now, yet another variation in the same telling of the story is, instead of being found in the basement, remember how I mentioned when we popped up the original photo, how there's an iron rail spiked fence out in front of the home?
Right.
In the other variation of this story, of the 1943 version of this story,
Okay.
is that his body is found impaled on the wrought iron fence around the front of the home on one of the spikes.
Okay.
Okay. So now I'm going to tell you a second version of the same story. I'm going to paraphrase a lot of it because honestly, a lot of it is kind of the same.
Okay.
The second version of the story takes place, instead of in 1943, it takes place in 1887. It is Christmas Eve when the two sailors arrive in London. Not having money for lodging, and also being the fact that it's Christmas Eve, they find Berkeley Square abandoned. Again.
Right, right.
It's obviously vacant at this point. They settle in on the second floor again. They're restless. Again, Blunden is restless and frightened by the environment that he's in. Hears footsteps this time.
Okay. All right. Well,
And
last
soon
time it was a moist scraping.
In the first one, it was a moist scraping sound.
Okay.
Here he's hearing footsteps in the corridor, and then all of a sudden the door opens.
Mm-hmm.
And this time it is described as a dark, shapeless form.
Okay.
So like a blobbish mist form.
Mm-hmm.
Instead of having a rifle in this story, he has a fire poker.
Okay. From the fireplace?
What's that?
The fire poker from the fireplace?
Fireplace, yeah.
Okay.
Martin's awakened, sees a massive tendril strangling Blunden at the point where he awakes this time.
Okay.
Fearing for his own safety, he runs out of the room, down the stairs, out of the building. He finds a constable, relays the story to the constable. The two men go back to the home, and Blendon is found dead on the pavement, either having been jumped or thrown from the second floor window.
Mm-hmm.
His body crushed in the fall. Of course, there are a few more gory versions where he ends up impaled on the spike.
Right, right.
Okay. So now let me set about debunking the 1943 story.
Okay.
Okay.
Do we want to put the picture up of?
Yeah, you
one
can
of
throw the
Okay.
sailors' pictures and some of the images that we have up here. So
Yeah, this is supposedly one of the pictures. Reenacted
artistic
illustration.
rendering.
Yeah, yeah. And what I find funny though is the moist scraping, because one of the descriptions was of like an octopi that, well, like a freshwater octopus. In other words,
Yeah.
I'm not jumping ahead, am I? Because I don't want to take. Okay. Supposedly the creature, the thing, the nameless thing, was they thought it to be a freshwater octopi that somehow lived in the sewer systems below this residence, and when people would break in, it would make its way up and go after whomever was in the home. Supposedly this is what went after the sailors, and according to the first story, the moist scraping would kind of make sense because the octopus has their beaked mouth on the underside of their body, and when they move across dry land, they slide, and the beak would most likely be what would be making the scraping noise. So the kind of like slimy tendricle moist noise with the scraping beak would make sense. But what doesn't make sense is, why would an octopus, first off, how would it know that anybody's even in there? Second of all, how could it make its way up from the basement, 1, 2, basically up 3 stories,
Mm-hmm.
being that far out of water? Because I mean, even though octopus can move around on dry land, it's for short distances, and they need to immediately get back in the water, otherwise they'll suffocate.
Yeah. Yeah. And the undulating movement and stuff like that would definitely kind of lend me to the thought of a freshwater octopi, being the creature. But then again, too, you also point out, well, why does it all of a sudden, when these two people are there, decide to come up?
Right.
It's never,
Exactly.
it's never really talked about in any of the other versions,
Mm-hmm.
except for, the mist, the misty form, brown mist form and stuff like that.
Right. Right.
But I want to get on here and kind of tell you why the 1943 story isn't true,
Okay.
or basically easily debunked.
Okay.
It took me about 5 minutes on Google to do this. They were both, the story says that they were both from the HMS Penelope.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. There is an HMS Penelope in the British service in the 1940s.
Okay.
Okay. Basically, in 1942, it is being used in the Malta area. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So this story supposedly happens in 43. So given the fact that the second version of the story says Christmas,
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to give you an idea of where the HMS Penelope is during the year of 1943. In June, it is in the Sicilian Channel, involved in operations there. August of 43, it's deployed in support of Operation Husky, or as I like to think about it, me shopping for pants in junior high, as part of the Sicilian landings during World War II. In September, with the announcement of the armistice with Italy, it's again in the Aegean Sea.
Mm-hmm.
October, it is part of a light cruiser flotilla
Mm-hmm.
that is working on keeping German U-boats out of the area.
Mm-hmm.
In December, it leaves the Mediterranean for a short period of time to hunt down a blockade runner in the Bay of Biscay. Okay. So nowhere in 1943 is the HMS Penelope anywhere near London. It's in the Mediterranean the entire year.
Right.
In January of 44, it's still in the Mediterranean. It comes back to the Mediterranean. It's part of the Enzo landings. And it is sunk in February of 44. Okay. So that right there pretty much gives you a timeline of where the HMS Penelope is, right?
Right.
So then I went into the British Naval Archives and looked up the Blunden was his last name.
Mm-hmm.
And I looked for a death record of Blunden from World War II from 1943.
Right.
It was Edward Blunden and Robert Martin. Martin, of course, survives in this story. There is no record of Blunden's death. There is a Blunden, but it's not an Edward Blunden, and it's much later in 45, I believe he passed. This Blunden dies. Okay. Also, to further discredit this story, Mag's Brothers, the antiquarian bookshop, the longest running antiquarian bookshop, is already occupying the building in 1937. It occupied the building from 1937 to 2015.
Right.
Now, if you put the two sailors' story in 1887, the story fits because the house is vacant in 1887.
Right.
And was in a state of disrepair. So to take it out of 1943 and put it into 1887, it works much better. Now, the question would be, is there an HMS Penelope that is active in the British Naval Services in 1887?
Right.
Well, lo and behold, it was commissioned in 1867. The HMS Penelope was a Central Battery ironclad corvette. Saw service in the British Navy from 1868 until being sold for scrap in 1912. Now, little harder to gain naval records from back at that point on where they were, but it was used as part of the Coast Guard Channel fleet, and then later used as a Coast Guard ship until 1887. And it was mobilized for a little while as for the Anglo-Egyptian War and stuff like that. But it was basically, being an ironclad, was designed to be in inshore shallow draft areas. So it does put it in and around London and the inner channels and stuff in England in and around 1887.
Okay.
So the story fits better at that point because it does not in any way fit in 1943.
Right. Now, you said it was sold for scrap in
1912.
The Penelope.
The active HMS Penelope from 1867 was sold in 1912. A later ship was christened and commissioned, the HMS Penelope, that was used during World War II.
Okay. All right. That's why I got a little confused there for a second. I'm like, wait a second. Didn't you say it was sunk before 1912? But now that makes sense. If there were two Penelopes. and neither one of them would have been the 1940 something.
Yeah, the active Penelope in 43 would have been nowhere near the coast of England, and was sunk in 44. So him dying, and also there's no death record for him in 1943 in the Royal Navy Archives.
Right, right.
His name, though, it's funny because his name is also the name of a famous British poet from World War One. So, don't get me wrong. People have similar names. If you look it up, it's not, that uncommon that people would have a similar name.
Right, right.
But like Maggs Brothers has, like I said, also owned the building from 1937 until 2015, when they had moved their shop towards the end of 2015. They moved to a bigger building on Corazon Street right down the road.
So 50 Berkeley Square is vacant then?
Currently, I believe it's owned by BP, British Petroleum, the gas company, oil company. Yeah, I believe that's who currently owns it. Now, when you get to the 1930s through 2015, being that it was used as a bookstore, one of the odd things is there were signs on the upper floors that basically said, do not use, do not enter, no admittance, due to, it was more like police signage and not just like office owner of the building signage. It was more along the police lines. But now they do report, hearing and some strange activity in the building when they owned it.
And they didn't use the upper floors, though, right? They only used the lower levels?
They used the first and second floor, but the second floor was more office space than anything, so it wasn't used a lot, but it was used.
Right, right.
One of the more famous stories from the office on the second floor was a guy is sitting in his office at his computer, looks up at the doorway, and the door slowly creaks open, and a brown mist form rolls in through the doorway.
That's creepy.
Now, it didn't do anything. It didn't approach him. It just kind of rolled into the room and kind of just kept going, like just passed through the wall and stuff like that. Enough to startle him and stuff like that. And going back to, of course, the past history of the brown mist and all these people dying. There have been paintings thrown down the steps. Different little things. They've heard kids laughing. They've seen the maid walking through the building and stuff like that. They've had reports of seeing her on the upper floors looking out the windows. So
all in all, there is a ton of paranormal activity throughout a couple centuries.
Yeah, there's a lot of just, again, it's kind of hard to keep an active timeline on it and keep a clear history, because one of the things, like Charlie, who had brought this topic up, he and I had spoke about it a little bit, and he actually pointed out something. There are a lot of newspaper articles attributed to this story and all that. But one of the things in British or in European newspapers, it's very sensationalized stories. They kind of enhance what's going on. Their style of newspaper is considered tabloid, and it's not just a reference. Americans think of tabloids as the old supermarket Weekly World
National
News, Bigfoot's
Enquirer,
having my baby, stories. But
do they even make them anymore?
I
Like
think
the
they
National
still do it.
Enquirer?
Maybe not. I'm not sure. I thought they did.
Yeah, I used
But
to love that when I was a kid, seeing those the
Bat
Bat Boy
Baby.
family. Yeah.
Now, one of the things I believe could have happened with the 1943 story is I'm going to keep talking. I'm just going to take my headphones off for a second and get up from my desk. So give me 1 second.
Sure.
One of the things I think could have happened with 1943 is it could be a case of people not paying attention to what the newspaper was producing. And I don't know if you folks will be able to see this at home. This was a reprint of I believe this was Lindbergh flight in the 1920s. I believe that was 1927. This is one of the projects that we had done at the newspaper. Was we were celebrating our 150th anniversary. So we had reprinted classic front pages throughout the history of the newspaper that I was working with. Mm-hmm. So could the 1943 version of the story be hey, we're kind of, 1943 World War II, Britain, London, you would have been, suffered through bombing from the Nazis. You would have been in what they consider probably one of the darkest hours of humanity's time on Earth. Mm-hmm. So was it something to get people's mind off of the war and the stuff going on? And did they reprint a story in 1943 to get people's mind off of the bombing and stuff like that was going on?
It's a really good thought. I mean, that's totally plausible.
Yeah. So you think about it that way, it would take...
It's not uncommon for stuff like that to be done, too, as a means to distract, Yeah.
So did they maybe report a past story as a current story to kind of get people, again, just off the thought of every time those air raid sirens go off, we have to huddle in a basement in the underground and all that, and hope the bomb doesn't collapse the area we are and we die.
Right.
So that could be a possible reason why it shows up in 1943, but there's no guarantee that's what it is. But just thinking about the way the newspaper industry and stuff works and the possibilities to give it maybe just a mistaken identity or a mistaken time frame for the story. Now, of course, like I showed the copy I showed of what we had done, you clearly see that it's not just a reprint, and nobody would mistake that paper for the paper we put out on that day.
Right.
But that was the cover that came out. So could a story inside of the paper be reprinted and people nowadays have a copy of it, and then all of a sudden are like, oh yeah, well, it's in the December 1943 edition, so it has to have happened in December of 43. Mm-hmm. Now, Harry Price, who is a early paranormal researcher, he had scrutinized piles of the old newspapers and, different accounts of the Nameless thing of Berkeley Square. And he came up with an odd suggestion to what had happened. Mm-hmm. He basically thought that in the 1790s, there was a counterfeiting ring in London that was counterfeiting the notes, the British pounds and all that. Mm-hmm. And he felt maybe that they had frequented 50 Berkeley Square and used it as like a hideout and a lair. And so they were creating the Scooby-Doo mystery, banging, chains rattling, spooky stories to keep people from getting involved or coming to and around the property.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, that was kind of his like basic of the, well, I got to think of something plausible, but it's still, his major quote was, the mystery of Berkeley Square still remains a mystery.
Right.
The story of a haunted house in Mayfair can be replicated in a few words. The house contains at least one room of which the atmosphere is supernaturally fatal to the body and mind. A girl saw, heard, and felt such a horror in it that she went mad, never recovered her sanity long enough to tell how or why.
Mm-hmm. Hmm.
You know, the newspaper in the years from 1840 on considered always had the houses disturbed, haunted, inhabited by something truly demonic.
Well, I don't know. It sounds like it could definitely be like what you said before. I think it's sensationalizing a story to distract and, pull people's minds away from what's really going on. Kind of like how, like today, with the way the media throws certain things in your face to kind of distract you from what's really going on behind the scenes and this, that, and the other things. So I don't know. Could a lot of these be made up? I mean, it's the same thing goes along with any ghost story. How true is it really? I mean, you pretty much put to bed the whole sailor story.
I put to bed the whole sailor story being involved in 1943.
Mm-hmm.
I kind of would say I helped validate the 1887 version of it, though.
Yeah.
With the ship being in that area, fitting, more or less the, time frame. Like I didn't have time to actually search the British Naval Archives for the crew or deaths from the Penelope from the 1887 time frame.
Right.
But there's a modern interest that was, kind of brought on by Peter Underwood's book Haunted London in 1975, and that kind of reignited people's interest in the stories.
Mm-hmm.
But they all could just be really, really old ghost stories.
Yeah.
It's the scary house that, at one point is kind of in a state of disrepair.
Mm-hmm.
So it's that scary old house. People
right.
tell
and
those.
It's occupied. It's not occupied. It's not, is why do people keep moving in and out? Why is it left and blah, 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 I mean, there's houses around here that kind of generate the same kind of buzz. People live in it for a while, then all of a sudden they're gone. Like, why would they only move in there for so long and then just abandon the house? Then it'll go up on sheriff's sale or whatever. Then somebody else will move in, and they're like, why? What's going on with that? But it could just be the way it is. You know what I mean? There has no paranormal ties to it whatsoever. But I don't know.
Yeah, so I mean, a lot of it just kind of, it to me, it seems like really just good old ghost stories. One of the things I found, of course, I'm so far out of the video game playing stage of my life. Mm-hmm. The house is actually featured in one of the Assassin's Creed games, Assassin's Creed Syndicate in London. And basically Charles Dickens takes the character to the home, and they basically tell the stories of the girl who threw herself, the servant who threw herself from the upper floor, and they also kind of tell the stories that are tied to the Mr. Myers character.
Yeah.
They don't. It's not quite the same story, but it's the same. Fiance left. He goes crazy, but it basically turns out that the person still living in the house is making all the ghost stories up. It's basically like a Scooby Doo thing at that point.
Yeah.
There was a 1947 British movie called The Ghost of Berkeley Square, which really has nothing to do with the nameless thing of Berkeley Square. It's basically two military officers that accidentally poison themselves and are basically stuck in the house until the monarchy visits to release them. And it basically starts in the 1700s and goes all the way up until World War II, when Queen Elizabeth, or maybe World War, no, it was like World War II, I believe, time frame. And the Queen visits the home to see the bomb that had fallen on it the night before. She came to see the damage. And that's how they're released, and they get to go to heaven.
I'd actually like to see that.
It's not, if you're okay with like 1940s and 50s, like silly ghost movies.
Yeah.
It's actually pretty funny and enjoyable to watch.
Had
nothing to do with our research on this topic for this evening, but it was an hour and 25 minutes of today that was, at least interesting and funny.
Well, do we have anything else we need to add to this? I mean, it's 10 o'clock now. Do we want to do a wrap up, or do you still have
I would say we do a wrap up for the evening, because it is also a Sunday and people do have work tomorrow.
That's right.
Well, some people do.
Yeah, right.
But yeah, I think we could, the other story that we had kind of punched up as a filler piece, we can, maybe do some other time, or just, if we revisit London for some scary stories, we can always come back to it.
Yep, I agree with that. All right. Well, like we always say when we end the show, anybody out there who wants to get in touch with us, you could reach us at our different media outlets. You could go to our website at www.explorersgroup.com and go to our Contact Us page and get in touch with us there. You can find us on Twitter at Explorers Group is the handle, and on Facebook, facebook.com/Explorers. You find us there. And through our website, if you click on our archive shows, you can link to our YouTube channel. So we'd appreciate it if you guys kind of hopped over there and hit the subscribe and notification buttons and all that, and you'll be able to be notified anytime we put up not just archive shows, but we also upload videos when we do investigations and stuff like that. Anytime we find any kind of interesting evidence or anything of the like, we post it up there for you guys to kind of take a listen to and give us your thoughts and feedback on that. And one of the things that I'd like to post here too, I'll bring it up into the screen. We are currently running a contest on our Facebook page for everybody to kind of go in there and give us a topic that you would like for us to talk about on the show, whether it be something from the paranormal field, cryptozoology field, the extraterrestrial. It doesn't have to be those specific things. It could be anything underneath that. Like it could be Bigfoot, Dogman, Little Green Men. It could be poltergeist. It could be, anything you want to hear about, anything you want us to talk about, or perhaps if there's an author who is, big on a certain subject, we could, you'd like to have them on the show. Like we had Lyle Blackburn on the show. We had Jeff Wamsley from West Virginia with the Mothman and everything. We're trying to get Ken Gerhardt on the show. We're going to send him some dates and get him on the show. There's a few other people that we'd like to get on. I'd like to reach out to some authors that both Chad and I really like and that have good content on the paranormal, cryptozoological, and extraterrestrial realms. And so, yeah. hit us up on Facebook, Twitter, our website, whatever. Just let us know what you want to hear and want us to talk about. This, like Chad had said earlier, the show tonight was actually a topic. Now, granted, our little not contest, but our little post that we put out there is running into the end of January, because we want to see what topics seem to be the most popular from everybody, and from there we'll kind of pick it and talk about it. But tonight's topic was actually one of our viewers had messaged us, and we just thought it was really cool, so we wanted to talk about it. So
yeah, it was one of those ones we started researching it and started looking at it, and it was kind of one of those moments of yeah, I know this is a submission for this contest, but I really kind of want to talk about it now since I've been reading all this stuff. So,
yeah, we talked about it earlier in the week, and we just were like, oh man, we got to do it. We got to do it. So, Chad busted his tail on getting all this information together and everything. So thank you for that. I appreciate it, Chad, as always. So, all right, without anything, I don't have anything else to say. So, I mean, I'll just say good night to everybody. Good night, Chad. Thank you as always for being my best friend and my co-host. So we'll be working on the next show soon.
Yep. Well, thank you everybody for joining in tonight. I hope it was enjoyable. Again, I'd also like to thank my co-host and best friend Les, for kind of helping get everything going tonight, and his new microphone and
yeah.
So
thanks, new Mike.
Yeah. So, yep, I hope to talk to everybody this coming Thursday, and have a safe and fun week and enjoy yourself as much as you can. And we will talk to you later.
We'll talk to you then. Good night.